So it seems like every week there's a new breakthrough in tech, whether it's a new AI tool or a chip that's faster than all the other chips or an app that does things that no one could even imagine. So on the surface, it really does look like we're living in a time of rapid innovation. But if you look a bit closer, something is very off. A lot of these tools are impressive and they're cool, but they're not new in the way that we normally think of new. They may be faster and sleeker and more convenient, but they're still just more improved versions of things that we already had. And if you look at the world really, really closely, then it's not that much different than it was 20 or 30 years ago. That's where the phrase nothing new, just more comes in. It's a phrase Peter Thiel talks about in his book 0 to 1. And in this book, he goes over the idea that most of what we see today isn't actually real innovation. A lot of what we call innovation today is just scaling things that already exist. It's horizontal progress instead of vertical progress. And while this is still improvement, it's different from what the real innovation actually is. Because real innovation, which Peter Thiel calls going from 0 to 1, isn't just about scaling something that's already there, but it's about creating something that's actually new, something that's genuinely different. And that's what I want to talk about in this video, why so much of what we call innovation isn't actually progress, and what it might take to start building again. So let's start off with this simple claim. We live in the most technologically advanced time that there has ever been in all of human history. That is a good place to start. We have apps that can get us anything in minutes. We have AI tools that can write for us. We have rockets that can literally land themselves. In a lot of ways, it really does seem like innovation is improving at an extremely fast rate in all directions. But if you look at different areas around the world, there are some where innovation just hasn't been moving forward. Planes, for example, still don't fly faster. Cities aren't really any smarter. Energy is still mostly about fossil fuels. Medicine moves at a crawl. And although we constantly talk about technology, we still have all these problems like climate, housing, education, and healthcare. And when people talk about how much we're advancing, how much technology is moving forward, it makes you ask the question why none of these problems are even close to being solved. And so that's what sparks the contradiction that Peter Thiel talks about in his book. Innovation seems like it's accelerating at an extremely rapid pace until you ask, what is actually different? And so that's where we dive into the book. There's a line early in the book that reads, "The next Bill Gates will not build an operating system. The next Larry Page won't make a search engine. If you're copying these people, you aren't learning from them." It sounds like a motivational speech, but it's actually more of a warning. What Peter is pointing to with this message is that we've gotten really good about just copying what other people make and not good about inventing new things that can actually improve society. And that's where the title of the book comes in, 0 to 1. Peter's argument is that there are two kind of processes. The first is what he calls a horizontal progress, where you take something that already exists and then you scale it or you make it better or you manufacture it in a more efficient way. So going from one functioning product to many functioning products, from one factory to many factories, or from one software tool to many variations of the exact same idea. Usually most of these variations have small incremental improvements for people. And it's important to remember that these are still improvements, meaning that technology is still advancing. However, the other kind of progress that exists is vertical progress. This is what Peter calls going from 0 to 1. This is a product that is genuinely new, something that literally is completely different from what was there yesterday. Things like when the Wright brothers invented the plane, when the car was invented, when the first computer was invented. This is what going from 0 to 1 actually looks like. When you look at the world in this new way with vertical and horizontal progress being completely different, it completely changes everything. Because when you look at the world, you start to see that most of what we call innovation is actually only horizontal progress. We're copying things that are already invented and making slight improvements. And although that's good because it does get new technology to all sorts of different parts of the world and has increased globalization in a very large way, it's not anything new. And so the question very quickly becomes, is the world going from 1 to n or from 0 to 1? And to explain this concept, Peter uses this chart. This chart is what Peter sees as the 4 possible attitudes of a nation. The first is indefinite pessimism, which describes a negative outlook on a future without a clear understanding of its causes or a plan for action. This is a nation that's in a state of decline after having some sort of golden age. The best example for this would be Europe. From the 1600s to the 1800s, Europe was literally the center of almost all the innovation in the world. And then creeping up on them slowly, but in the 1900s taking full center stage, was the United States. Today, Europe feels almost like a relic of the past. There's really no direction, no one who's completely in charge, no one dominant over the others, and it really does feel like a bleak outlook for the future. And you can start to see where I'm going with this indefinite pessimism. The future is indefinite and there's a lot of pessimism. So what does this end up leading to? Well, it leads to a whole bunch of European nations not really having any directions, sort of reacting to things as they go, and really just hoping that things don't get worse. It's kind of funny because when you think of someone who doesn't really have a lot of direction, you sort of imagine them finding comfort in eating, things like drinking, just being very present in the moment, waiting to see what happens next. And that's exactly what you see in Europe with a lot of leisure activities and a lot of vacation mania. Now, let's move on to the second tier, which is definite pessimism. And definite pessimism is a mindset that also sees a bleak future, but in this case, there's a specific plan and a strategy to navigate through hard times. There's a definite future. It's not looking good, it's bleak, and so you have to find a way to deal with it. The future is definite, but there's a pessimistic outlook on it. The best example that Peter has for this is the Chinese. Now, when you think of China, you would probably think that they're a very optimistic nation, sort of being the nation with new technology and all these new ideas to challenge the United States. But when you look at what China has done with a horizontal and vertical axis, you really start to think about whether they're going from 1 to n or from 0 to 1. And what you find is that you see that China has risen so fast simply by copying the West. They burn more coal, they build more factories, they build bigger skyscrapers, they provide cheap labor, and I think one of the most important things is that they even adopted a form of state capitalism by opening up their economy to the world. However, when you look at the living standards in China, especially outside of the bigger cities, you start to see that it's still having a very rough time catching up to some of the richer nations. That's why you see a big clash between politicians in China and the wealthy in China, because the wealthy are trying to smuggle their wealth outside of China while the politician is striving to keep the wealth inside of China to really build it up. This definite pessimism in China actually starts to make a lot of sense when you look at the recent history in China. A lot of their leadership grew up around the Mao era, in which they experienced all sorts of famine and food shortages and just overall struggle. So when you see it in this way, it's very easy to see the mentality emerging of sort of preparing for the worst rather than building the future. However, I am very bullish on China, and it is just possible that this mentality may be switching to something else, especially with the recent last couple of years. Next up is definite optimism, a mindset where you believe the future will be better and that you should play a role in making it happen. This is where society's most remarkable people, whether they're engineers or businessmen or doctors or scientists, all use their abilities and their knowledge to shape the world into a better place. This is where true innovation happens, and happens extremely fast. Think of the United States during the 1900s, and I'll give you a couple examples for why this is the case. First of all, the Empire State Building was started in 1929 and finished in 1931. The Golden Gate Bridge was started in 1933 and finished in 1937. The Manhattan Project was started in 1941, and by 1945, you already had a working nuclear bomb. The Internet Highway System began constructing in 1956, and they opened 20,000 miles of road by 1965. And of course, the Apollo program began in 1961 and put humans on the freaking moon by 1972. This was a time when the country not only believed that the future was going to be brighter, but they were also tasked with the actions that were making that future. People around this time were expected to build that future, to make the world a better place. The future was definite, it's always going to keep rising, and it was for sure optimistic. And so that leads me to the fourth box, which is indefinite optimism. This is where Peter Thiel believes that we have come to today. Indefinite optimism is where people believe the future will be better, but don't have a plan to make it happen. The future is optimistic, but it's indefinite, so we're not going to really focus on shaping it right now. The shift happens around the 1970s. People began to take progress for granted, like it was just something that was always going to happen. In other words, the future is bright, but we don't know how to build it. And so when you think of someone who's sure the future is going to be bright, but doesn't know exactly what to do, you don't often see them plunge into one direction with all their efforts and with all their focus and place a huge bet on one thing. But what you usually see people do is to diversify, to rearrange something that's already there, something that's already been proven, and start there. Bankers rearrange capital structures to create more money, companies start seeking to repackage old products but in new ways, and consultants spring up and look to squeeze efficiency out of everywhere that they can. And that's exactly what happened. A nation that prided itself on advancement and innovation and free thinking suddenly stopped. They began to take innovation for granted. And when a nation is lost, the best bet is to diversify into safer inventions, things that have already been done, just slightly better. Now, I'm sure by this point, a lot of you might be arguing that we actually have made a lot of progress. We have moved forward quite a bit, and I'm sitting here in my basement, a natural basement dweller, just being pessimistic. But let me take you through a couple different sectors to show you that this innovation, this rapid innovation that feels like a lot, might just be an illusion. illusion. Let's start with transportation. In the 19th century, we went from riding around on horses to traveling in cars to literal commercial airplanes in the sky to the Concorde jet, which can fly at literal supersonic speeds by the 1970s. So where did we go with that? Well, traffic is still mostly the same, maybe slight improvements there. The roads have slightly improved once again, and the Concorde jet was actually disallowed because of the sonic boom it made and said that it would disturb a lot of people with the amount of noise it made, which is kind of disappointing to me. Let's move on. Next, we have nuclear physics. So let's take this one back to the 1940s after the invention of the first nuclear bomb. After this miracle in human achievement where you literally gave humans the power of the sun, most people believe that you could now harness enough energy to power the entire world off of nuclear physics. There were thousands of people working on this idea. It was the pinnacle in modernity of human achievement. So what happened to that? Well, once again, you look at the vertical and horizontal progress on this, and you see that there has been slight improvements to every new weapon, but for the most part, since the invention of the hydrogen bomb in 1953, there's just been horizontal progress where you ramp up production on these massive weapons. As for nuclear reactors, we're actually building way less nuclear reactors because of public fear and the overall many regulations that have to do with this. Not to mention that there's been a very large stagnation in string theory that hasn't really moved all that much for the past 30, 40, maybe even 50 years. This is compared to the leaps and bounds that were taken towards a unified field theory in the early 20th century. Well, what else do we have? We have space travel, in which we landed on the moon 50 years ago. We have housing, where we actually seem to be building homes slower than before. It's really not hard to see that in many sectors, technology has slowed down. So why does it feel like it's still progressing? Well, in large part, this is due to one thing, because technology in our world has become synonymous with screens. I want you to ask yourself one question. Look around you and think about what would be different from 1970 if you took away every screen in front of you. At least for me, I have my camera, the screen on my camera, my monitor, my computer, my clock. I think that's about it. But when you look around me, everything in here that isn't a screen has already been around since 1970. Almost everything that has to do with silicon chips has improved exponentially. Things like phones, laptops, TVs, electric cars, and probably the biggest one right now, AI. Everything in this chip sector almost feels like a sort of magic. I mean, the screen that you're watching this video on right now probably has more computing power than the technology and the computers that took people to the moon. And I don't want to hear any of that "we didn't land on the moon" nonsense. This is a ridiculous argument. Back to the point, because of this computing tech, you can generate images, translate languages, summon food in moments, speak to people across the world, all in just a couple taps. But it's because we interact with these screens so much, because so much of our life is spent with them, that any sort of improvement in this feels like progress. When your phone upgrades or the newest computer comes out, it feels like all of technology has advanced. That is the whole illusion. That is Peter Thiel's entire argument. Not that all of technology has stagnated, but that technology has become narrowly confined to one sector. All of this excitement that we have about silicon chips and all these new ideas about AI or new sort of technology hasn't really translated into other sectors. This is the reason for why in everything else we settle for more instead of new. Because as long as this one sector is advancing, all the other ones just don't seem to matter as much. Now, there is one argument to this, and of course we can't go the whole video without talking about AI, because AI is what everyone in the moment seems to be betting on. And I'd sort of like to put a new frame, a new sort of perspective on this idea. When you think of what technology has done for all of human history, from the first person who picked up a stick and attached a rock to it and made a sphere, what technology has done is increased our mastery over nature and reduced the role of chance in our lives. This is very important, and the way I see it, there's two ways that the world will move with AI. The first is that AI actually does this. It increases our mastery over nature, which means we can to some extent control it, and it reduces the role of chance in our lives so that we can predict more things. In this scenario, AI will actually advance all the fields that have been stagnated for decades now, and it'll do this all simultaneously because it can think faster than humans. If this were to be the case, then we could have unlimited energy and new ways of transportation and cures to every disease. An example of how AI is currently doing this is that AI was actually able to recreate almost every single protein that makes up life. And by having these 3D models of every protein, we can explore cures to more diseases, and we can have a better understanding of what makes up a living organism. However, on the flip side, there's a concept called the alignment problem, where in order to achieve the first scenario, the AI's goals and motives has to be aligned with the same motives and goals as as humans. If it's aligned, then we flourish, and if it's not, then we get an AI with the darker personality traits of humans. You can think of the dark tetrad with the sadistic, narcissistic, psychopathic, and Machiavellian side of things. And I mean, when you really think about a robot that's psychopathic, Machiavellian, sadistic, and narcissistic, I mean, we're cooked. This would mean all the war, all the misery, all the suffering, driven by a machine that's more intelligent than us. Now, of course, it's very easy, right? Just pick the first scenario. But the problem is that we have a very little understanding of what drives our motives and our actions. It's already extremely hard to predict what a human will do, and when you think about transferring that over to a machine, it all becomes a different sort of mess. And so AI becomes sort of like this lottery ticket, where if we win, we get a utopia, and if we lose, then we get a sort of Skynet Terminator scenario. However, whatever happens, we have to continue moving forward no matter what. So what happens next for humanity? And Thiel talks about this as well. And he lays out 4 potential possibilities for what's going to happen to humanity. The first is called Recurrent Collapse. This is the idea that civilizations are built up only to collapse, to be rebuilt, to collapse over and over again for all of ever. You can think of all the civilizations in the past that rose and fell, like the Mayan civilizations, the Babylonians, or even the Roman Empire. But on a smaller scale, you can also think of the stock market, which rises only to fall again, only to rise again, only to fall again. And you can think of businesses as well. If society at the moment were to collapse, but not completely, it would take another 100 years or so to rebuild everything that was destroyed in this fake apocalyptic scenario. The second way Thiel thinks a future could play out is by simply plateauing. In this future, it would look very similar to the present. There would continue to be just horizontal movement, horizontal progression, very little vertical progression, and in this case, third world countries would eventually catch up to all the richer countries, but everyone would sort of stagnate at that level, and there would be very little new innovation or inventions. The third possible future is very bleak, and it's extinction. Now, this has never happened before unless you're a dinosaur, and even if you're a dinosaur, I still see dinosaurs walking around all the time, so this future is very, very unlikely. But you still have to take it into account when you think of the technology that humans have developed. We now have enough nuclear weapons that are capable of destroying the entire planet. Not only that, but AI has the possibilities of being an extinction level threat as well. You also have to factor in things like global warming, scalability issues, or new diseases or space threats that could threaten humanity. Now, I really think that the scenario is extremely unlikely. I doubt it's going to happen, but you still have to include the possibility in there, I guess. But all of this leads to the main point of the video, which is number 4, the takeoff. This one is actually the most difficult to imagine. Not because it's the most unlikely to happen, I actually think it's the most likely to happen, but because we literally have no idea what it would look like. It would be like any of the hundreds of thousands of people that lived before there were cars thinking of a car. And I mean, eventually one did. But the point is, it's very hard to predict. It could look like interstellar travel. It could look like unlimited energy. There really is no way to predict this because the future relies on innovative breakthroughs. And innovative breakthroughs are, of course, hard to predict. And that's sort of the point of the whole video, because I think that there has been a shift in the recent couple years or so. More and more people are taking risks, moving from indefinite optimism to definite optimism. Less people focusing on just optimizing and being efficient, and more people focusing on making something that will truly change the world in a new way. It's people pursuing vertical innovation instead of horizontal efficiency. And that's what we need. We need people taking these risks, building the future that we want to build. And that's sort of what's been happening in the recent couple of years. I mean, look at all the new AI tools that have been built and how fast that has progressed. Look at the rockets that Elon has made and have been able to successfully re-land themselves. Look at the amount of progress there's been in electric vehicles and moving away from fossil fuels into a different direction. And I think the one that I'm most excited for is the idea of discovering the new neutron in nuclear physics. I am personally very excited about that one and just the idea of becoming an interstellar species. So even though this entire video was extremely pessimistic, I'm pretty optimistic. I think the future is looking pretty bright. Anyway, that's all I have for you today. Thank you for watching. If you want daily doses of historical wisdom, check out Histos. The link will be in the description. And if you got something from this video, consider checking out this other video where I talk about how to bring the best parts of history into the future with us, because I think that's very important. So that's it for today. See ya.